The snow didn't just fall that winter. It came to bury the world. Out on Ridge Creek, where the pines clawed at a gray sky, a widow named Clara Whitmore moved through the silence. Her cabin was the only warm thing for miles, a tiny heart beating against the cold. She'd gone out for firewood, same as any other morning, but this morning was different. That's when she saw it. A streak of crimson slashed across the fresh snow. It was wrong, a wound on the clean, white skin of the earth. Her breath caught in her throat. Her pulse began to thunder, a frantic drum against the frozen quiet. She followed the trail, her boots sinking deep. The shape in the snow was a man. He was face down, half swallowed by a drift, his chest bare to the biting wind. A tangle of long, dark hair, a back covered in scars that told 100 violent stories. Clara knew she should run. She knew she should turn back, bolt the door, and forget what she'd seen. But then she saw the faded paint on his arm, a symbol she'd been taught to fear her whole life. Apache, an enemy. Her blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a man. This was the monster from the stories she heard whispered in town. A savage. A killer. Every instinct screamed at her to leave him to the cold. It would be justice, wouldn't it? But as she took a step back, his lips moved. They were cracked, blue and trembling. A single broken word slipped out, so quiet it was almost stolen by the wind. Help. Me. The plea shattered her fear. It sounded too much like her husband, Thomas, when the fever had taken him, his voice begging for a mercy that never came. The town had left her to bury him alone in this same frozen ground. No one had come to help. No one ever came. She fell to her knees beside the stranger. The smell of blood was thick in the air, metallic and hot. He was burning with fever, even as frost gathered on his eyelashes. This man, her enemy, was dying, and she was the only one who could stop it. Cursing herself, cursing the sky, cursing the God who would give her such a choice, she pulled his heavy arm over her shoulder. She began to drag him. The snow fought her every step of the way. He groaned once, a low, guttural sound of pure agony, and then went limp. By the time she reached the cabin, her lungs burned and her fingers were numb. She shoved the door open and half carried, half dragged him inside, letting him fall to the floorboards by the hearth. The firelight flickered over his scarred skin. She peeled his coat away to see the wound, and her heart stopped. It was a gunshot, a nasty blackened hole just below his ribs. The bullet was still inside him. She could feel it. She had no doctor, no morphine, no right to save this man's life. Saving him could be a death sentence for her. If the town found out, they'd call her a traitor. They might even hang her. But her hands moved before her mind could protest. She fetched the knife her husband used to skin deer. She boiled it in the kettle. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey she kept but never touched. When the hot steel touched his skin, his eyes snapped open. They were like a storm breaking, dark and fierce, but not cruel. They were filled with a world of pain. "Hold still," she whispered, her own voice shaking. "This will be quick." He didn't fight her. He didn't even cry out. He just clenched his jaw, his breath hissing through his teeth as she cut into his flesh. Blood welled up, hot and impossibly red against her pale fingers. She probed for the lead slug, her stomach churning. Then she found it. She dropped the mangled piece of metal into a tin bowl. It landed with a sick clatter that echoed in the silent cabin. She stitched him up with her sewing needle and thread. Each stitch was a prayer she didn't know she remembered, a desperate plea whispered into the wound. When it was done, she pressed a clean cloth to his side and slumped back into her chair, trembling. Hours bled into one another. Outside, the snow fell thicker, trying to erase the trail, trying to erase her sin. Inside, the fire crackled, a lonely witness. She sat there, her rifle leaning against the wall, and watched his chest rise and fall. Each breath he took felt like a victory and a condemnation. He mumbled in his sleep, words in a language she'd only ever heard in curses. It didn't sound like a curse now. It sounded like he was calling for his mother. She wanted to hate him. It would have been so much easier. Hating him would have kept her safe. But this strange, aching pity was a poison. It was a warmth spreading through her frozen heart. As dusk fell, she fed him broth, one slow spoonful at a time. He was too weak to eat, but he tried, and the effort seemed to drain the last of his strength. His eyes opened, just a slit. "You, help," he rasped. She couldn't speak. She just nodded. A faint sound, almost a sigh of gratitude, escaped his lips before he slipped back into the fever dream. She sat by the fire, unable to look away from him. His shoulders were broad, marked with scars old and new. His hands were large and calloused, but they rested open, unguarded. There was no malice in him now, only exhaustion. By nightfall, her fear had changed. It was no longer a frantic panic. It was a quiet, watchful thing, a constant hum beneath her skin. She kept checking the window, expecting to see the bobbing lights of torches coming up the valley. A search party. For him, or for her. None came. But the wind moaned in the chimney like a warning. She remembered the preacher in town, how he'd looked at her after Thomas died. "The Lord tests the merciful with impossible choices," he had said, his voice dripping with hollow piety. This, she thought, was one of them. When the fire began to fade, she rose to add another log. The sudden flare of light painted them both in amber. For a second she saw her reflection in the cracked mirror over the hearth. A pale face, haunted eyes. A ghost tending to another ghost. She knelt beside him, her hand moving on its own to brush the damp hair from his forehead. "Don't you die here," she murmured. "Not after I've carried you this far." His eyelids fluttered. His voice was a dry whisper. "Your name?" She hesitated. "Clara." He repeated it. "Clara," as if testing the word on his tongue. Then, so quiet she almost didn't hear it, he said, "Elias." The name settled in the air between them. Elias. It wasn't just a label like savage or enemy. It was a name, a human name, and Clara felt it strike something deep inside her, something that had been frozen solid for a very long time. A man she should have left to die now had a name, and everything was different. The wind howled, rattling the cabin walls. A wolf cried out somewhere in the darkness, a long, mournful sound that seemed to echo the brokenness in both of them. She thought of the bloody trail she'd tried to cover with fresh snow. It would be gone by morning, as if none of this had ever happened. But it had. She could still feel the impossible weight of him, the warmth of his blood on her coat. That warmth was still here, faint, dangerous, and human. As she turned to fetch another blanket for him, his hand twitched in his sleep. His fingers barely grazed the hem of her skirt before falling away. The gesture was so small, so accidental, but it made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. She stood frozen, caught between her fear and this strange, new feeling. By midnight, the fire was just embers. She said a final silent prayer and turned toward her bed. But a sound stopped her. The creak of the floorboards. The rasp of a breath that was different now. Stronger. "Clara." His voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear, though filled with pain. She spun around, startled. "You should be resting." He looked at her, his eyes burning with fever and something else. A desperate plea. "Don't tell them I am here." Her throat went dry. Them? Who were they? The people from her town? Or someone else? Outside, the wind slammed against the door as if trying to get in. She didn't answer him. She just met his gaze. And in that heavy silence, something passed between them. A secret. A pact. And far off in the snow, unseen, another shadow moved through the trees. It was following the trail she thought she had buried. The storm had passed, but the real danger was just arriving. The world outside was trapped in white for days. A silent, waiting prison. Inside the cabin, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the man's ragged breathing. Elias slept. His body was at war with the fever, his spirit hovering somewhere between this life and the next. Clara moved like a ghost. She fed the fire, cleaned his wound, and whispered prayers she no longer believed in. She told herself this was duty, a debt to be paid for her own survival. She told herself it wasn't mercy, but every time he stirred in his fever dreams, her hand was already reaching for him, a cool cloth for his head, a spoonful of water for his lips. He woke near dawn, when the first pale light was filtering through the frost on the window. He tried to sit up, but a sharp hiss of pain escaped his lips, and he fell back. Before he could even speak, Clara was there. "You'll tear your stitches," she said. Her voice was calm, but her heart was a frantic drum. Elias looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He studied her face, the worry etched around her eyes, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. He opened his mouth to ask the question that hung between them. Why? But no words came out. Instead, he looked toward the window. "Still snowing," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. She blinked, surprised by the simple, normal words. A faint smile touched her lips. Still snowing. He nodded, and for a fleeting moment, a look of peace crossed his face. Then sleep pulled him under again. By that evening, the wind had finally died. Clara cracked the door open, letting in a wave of crisp, cold air. The snow stretched out, a perfect, unbroken blanket covering the sins of the world. It was clean, quiet, and merciless. When she turned back, Elias was watching her. His dark eyes followed her every move. They weren't just looking at her, they were searching her. "You are not afraid?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "I was," she admitted, her voice just as quiet. "But fear doesn't last long when a man's bleeding all over your floor." A shadow of a smile touched his mouth, then vanished. "You could have let me die." She looked at the fire, the flames dancing like memories. "I've already buried one man," she said softly. "Didn't have it in me to watch another die." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. He just nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. After that, the days fell into a strange, slow rhythm. Elias began to heal. His strength returned in small, quiet steps. He would sit by the hearth for hours, his hands busy sharpening his knife with a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape filling the silence. Clara would sit opposite him, mending her worn clothes, the flash of her needle keeping time. They rarely spoke. When they did, their words felt clumsy, too loud for the fragile peace they had built inside those four walls. She noticed the careful way he moved. He never touched what wasn't his. He never stepped too close. He seemed to be trying to make himself smaller, to take up less space in her world. One afternoon, as she reached for the kettle on the fire, their hands brushed. The contact lasted no more than a second, a fleeting warmth, but it sent a jolt through her that she felt all the way to her bones. A few days later, he was strong enough to step outside. Clara watched through the window as he stood in the snow, his breath a white cloud in the frigid air. He seemed impossibly tall, a scarred and powerful figure against the stark white landscape. He knelt down, scooped up a handful of snow, and whispered something in his own tongue. The words rose from his lips like smoke, a prayer to a god she did not know. He came back inside carrying a small bundle of firewood. He dropped it quietly by the hearth. "You shouldn't have," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I am not broken," he replied simply. His eyes met hers, and she found she couldn't argue. So instead, she grabbed another log and added it to the pile. They worked side by side, in silence, until the cabin was filled with the scent of pine and warmth. As the days turned into a week, then two, their two separate worlds began to merge. He repaired the broken latch on her fence. He oiled the rusty hinges on her tools. He moved with a quiet competence that spoke of a life spent surviving. She, in turn, taught him English words. "Spoon," she'd say, holding one up. "Spoon," he would repeat, his voice soft, his accent bending the word into something new. Chair. Light. Fire. At night, sitting by the dying embers, he would tell her stories. Not stories of war or violence, but fragments of his life before. He spoke of a river that ran through his homeland, of the songs his mother used to sing, of the stars his people used to follow before the army came and drove them from their land. She would listen, her hands still in her lap, her eyes wide. The way he spoke, with such reverence for a world that had been stolen from him, made her own small life feel both safe and incredibly fragile. But for every moment of quiet connection, the shadow of the world beyond her cabin grew longer. When she finally had to ride into town for flour and salt, the whispers followed her like flies. "There's the widow from Ridge Creek," someone muttered from the porch of the general store. "Heard she's got company." "An Injun, they say," another voice hissed. "Maybe she's keeping him for protection, or maybe for something else." Clara pretended not to hear. She kept her head held high, but she could feel the heat of their stares, the burn of their judgment. She bought her supplies, her hands trembling as she counted out the coins. Outside, Sheriff Abner Lowe was waiting for her. He was a hard man, but not a cruel one. His silence could be heavier than any threat. "Clara," he said, tipping his hat, "there's been some talk." "I heard," she said, her voice tight. He studied her face, his eyes missing nothing. "You know how this town is. Folks get scared. When folks get scared, they get stupid." "Maybe they have a right to be scared," she snapped before she could stop herself. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Just be careful, Clara. Don't give them a reason to come knocking on your door." The ride home was long and cold. The sheriff's warning echoed in her head. Elias was waiting for her at the door. He took one look at her face and knew. "They spoke of me," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "They'll come. If they think you're here, they'll come." He looked out at the snow-covered valley, his expression grim. "Then I go. Before the storm ends." "No!" The word burst out of her, raw and desperate. "If you leave, it only proves them right. They'll think you're guilty." He turned to her then, his dark eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. "You risk everything for me." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "I have nothing left to lose, nothing but this place, and you've helped me keep it." A new emotion flickered in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before, gratitude, but underneath it, sorrow. "Where I walk," he said quietly, "trouble follows." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let it find me, too." That night, sleep was impossible. The air in the cabin was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of what was coming. Elias sat by the door, sharpening his knife, the scrape of steel on stone, a steady, rhythmic sound in the darkness. Clara sat by the fire, pretending to mend a shirt that didn't need mending. The firelight threw their shadows onto the wall, his tall and still, hers smaller, hunched over her work. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "When the snow melts, I will go." Clara looked up, her heart clenching. "Go where? There's nothing out there but more snow, and men who'll shoot you on sight." He turned to face her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Better to die free than to have them take your name from you." A sudden, fierce anger rose in her. "You think I care about my name? About the gossip of fools?" He didn't answer, but his silence screamed the truth. He cared. For her. The next morning, the sky had cleared, Sunlight glittered on the snow, sharp and brilliant. Elias was outside, splitting wood. The swing of his axe was powerful, steady, almost graceful. Watching him, Clara felt a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Safety. And it terrified her more than anything. When he came inside, his breath steaming in the cold, she handed him a cup of hot coffee. He took it in both hands, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a new warmth, a softness that hadn't been there before. She hesitated, then found the courage to say it. "You could stay until spring." His eyes met hers, and for a long moment, she couldn't read the emotion in them. "Spring is a long way off," he finally said. "Snow hides many things, but not forever." She knew what he meant. The thaw was coming, and with it, the world. That night, as the wind kicked up again, he sat by the window, his knife resting on his lap, just watching the tree line. The faint scrape of metal had been replaced by a tense, watchful stillness. "See something out there?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. He didn't turn. Always. When she finally fell into a restless sleep, she dreamed. She dreamed of 2 sets of footprints in the snow leading away from her cabin, and a third set, heavier, following close behind. By late February, the world began to bleed. The snow melted, revealing the dark, muddy veins of the earth beneath. The road to town, impassable for months, was now a treacherous river of mud. Clara's supplies were gone. The flour sack was empty. The lamp oil was nearly gone. She couldn't put it off any longer. Elias offered to go for her. "They look for a man," he said, "not for me." She shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "They'd hang you before you even reached the general store." "No, I have to go." The morning she left, he stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his bare chest. The morning light framed him, turning his silhouette into something powerful and ancient. "They will look at you," he said quietly. "Let them look," she replied, pulling her shawl tighter. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid of their stares. She was afraid of coming back to an empty cabin. She was afraid of this silence returning. But she didn't. She just rode away. Town felt different, colder, even with the melting snow. The hunger and hardship of the long winter had sharpened people's edges, made their eyes hard. When Clara tied her horse outside the store, every head on the street turned. The whispers started instantly. Beatrice Rowan, a woman as round and loud as a church bell, was standing on the porch, flanked by 2 other women. Her smile was pure poison. "Why, if it ain't our little snowbound widow," she cooed. "We were starting to worry something had happened to you up there, all alone." Clara just nodded, her face a mask of stone, and pushed past them into the store. Inside she could still hear their voices, sharp and clear through the thin wooden walls. "Keeping company, they say. That Apache killer Elias, the one with the bounty." Clara froze. "Bounty?" Her blood ran cold. "Sheriff says he was part of the raid over on Miller's Creek, the one that killed the Johnson family. Lord have mercy on her soul, living with a murderer." Her basket of supplies suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She paid, her hands shaking so badly she could barely count the coins. She fled the store, desperate for the clean, cold air. But Sheriff Lowe was waiting for her. He blocked her path, his hat pulled low, his face grim. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk. I've got nothing to say. I put up a poster this morning, for a man named Elias, a reward for his capture, dead or alive." He looked her straight in the eye. "Big reward." She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a death sentence. "Folks are talking," the sheriff went on, his voice flat. "They're saying you're harboring him. Henry Rowan is stirring them up. You know Henry. He lost his brother in that raid. She thought of Henry, a bitter, angry man, and now he had a reason to turn his hate into action. Don't give them a reason to come up that mountain, Clara, the sheriff warned, because if they do, I won't be able to stop them. She ripped the reins from the post and mounted her horse without a word. She rode hard, the sheriff's words chasing her. The faces of the townsfolk burned into her mind. Dusk was falling when she reached the cabin. Elias was standing by the woodpile, axe in hand. He saw her face, and the axe fell from his grip. They know, he said. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She slid from the horse, her legs weak. They put a price on your head, Elias. They say you're a murderer. He looked away toward the darkening mountains. Some things the snow cannot hide. Is it true? She whispered, dreading the answer. He finally met her gaze. His eyes were filled with a pain so deep it stole her breath. There was a raid. There was killing. But it was not me. I was trying to stop it. I was shot by my own people for trying to save a child. The truth of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't a monster. He was a hero, and the world wanted to hang him for it. Then I go, he said, his voice resolute, before they come for you. No! The word was a raw cry. You leave, and you're a dead man. You stay, and you die with me, he finished, his voice gentle. You risk everything for a man with a price on his head. She shook her head, tears finally breaking free, tracing hot paths down her cold cheeks. There's no price high enough to make me give you up. His gaze softened. For the first time he reached out and touched her, his calloused fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek. Where I walk, he had told her, trouble follows. She leaned into his touch, her voice a fierce whisper. Then let it find us together. That night, they didn't sleep. They waited. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, a coiled snake ready to strike. Just before dawn, it did. The sound of hooves shattered the quiet. Not one horse. Many. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. Through the frosted window she saw them. 4 riders, their torches cutting fiery holes in the pale morning mist. Sheriff Lowe was in the lead, and behind him was Henry Rowan, his face a mask of cold fury, a rifle cradled in his arms. They'll kill you on sight, she hissed, grabbing Elias's arm. He was already on his feet, his face calm, his eyes clear. I will go to the barn. You tell them you have seen no one. No! If they find you, they'll burn this place to the ground with me in it. He looked at her then, a long, steady look that held 1,000 unspoken words. It was a look of gratitude, of sorrow, and of goodbye. He slipped out the back door and vanished into the trees just as a heavy fist hammered on the front. Clara took a deep breath and opened the door. Sheriff Lowe stood there, his face looking older than she'd ever seen it. Morning, Clara. Sorry to bother you. We got a credible report you've been keeping company that you shouldn't be. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. Company? I haven't seen another living soul all winter. Henry Rowan pushed past the sheriff, his eyes scanning the small cabin. Tracks in the snow say different. Where is he, widow? Where you hiding that murdering savage? Clara stepped in front of him, her small frame blocking his path. The only thing you'll find in here is a woman who's trying to survive. Now get out of my house. Move aside, Rowan growled, raising his rifle. That's enough, Henry. The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. He turned back to Clara, his expression pleading. Clara, please. If he's here, it's better he comes out now. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Her jaw tightened. What you call trouble, she said, her voice shaking with rage. I call a human being. A shocked silence fell over the small group. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Before anyone could speak, a sound came from the barn. The faint creak of a wooden door. Every head snapped in that direction. Clara's blood went cold. The sheriff motioned to his men. He started toward the barn, his boots crunching on the icy snow. Henry Rowan and the others followed, their rifles raised and ready. Clara stood frozen for a single heartbeat. Then she moved. She snatched her own rifle from its place by the hearth and ran out into the yard after them. The barn door swung open. Elias stood in the dim light, his hands raised in surrender, his face calm and resolute. "I will come," he said, his voice clear and strong. The sheriff stopped, surprised by his calm surrender. "No more blood," Elias said. Henry Rowan spat on the ground. "You'll hang for what you did, savage." Clara's voice cut through the tense air before she even realized she was speaking. "He saved my life." Every face turned to her. "A blizzard was coming," she said, her voice ringing with a truth they couldn't deny. "He could have stolen my horse, taken my supplies, and left me for dead. But he didn't. He stayed. He chopped my wood. He fixed my fence. Does that sound like the work of a monster?" The torches flickered. The men looked from her fierce, tear-streaked face to Elias's calm, wounded one. They saw the torn shirt, the still healing wound in his side. They saw a man, not a savage. Sheriff Lowe looked at them, then lowered his gun. "We'll take him to town," he said quietly. "There will be a trial." Elias nodded once. His eyes met Clara's, and in that single, shared glance, she saw everything: gratitude, apology, and a love so deep it broke her heart. As the men led him away, their torches disappearing down the path, she stood rooted to the spot, the cold seeping into her bones. She went back inside. The cabin felt huge and empty. His knife was still on the table. Beside it was a small piece of wood he had been carving. A bird, its wings half spread, ready for flight. Unfinished. She clutched it in her hand, the sharp edges digging into her palm. Outside, the wind started up again, whispering his name, and then, far away, beyond the ridge, a single gunshot cracked the morning silence. After that, there was nothing. Just the wind and the snow, and an emptiness that was bigger than the whole valley. Clara sank to the floor, the unfinished bird pressed to her chest, her world shattered into a million frozen pieces. The dawn that came next was a liar. It promised light and warmth, but all it brought was a cold gray emptiness. Clara hadn't moved from the window. The single gunshot echoed in her mind, a final brutal sound that had ripped her world apart. The men were gone. Elias was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical weight, pressing down on her, suffocating her. The small wooden bird was still clutched in her hand. One wing was smooth, perfectly formed. The other was still rough, half-carved. A life interrupted, a promise broken. She closed her fingers around it until the wood bit into her skin. "Please," she whispered to the empty cabin, to the empty world. "Let it be a lie." Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, they would have reached town. But what had happened on the trail? The gunshot. Was it a warning? An accident? Or was it an execution? She couldn't bear it. She couldn't just sit here and wait for a truth that would destroy her. She pulled on her coat, her movements stiff and clumsy. She saddled her horse, her hands trembling so badly she could barely buckle the straps. The ache in her chest was a shard of ice. The trail to town was a nightmare of mud and melted snow. She rode like a woman possessed, the landscape a blur of gray and white. When she reached the edge of town, the streets were quiet. Too quiet. Smoke curled from the chimneys, but no one was out. It felt like a ghost town. The sheriff's horse was tied outside his office. She dismounted, her heart hammering against her ribs, and pushed the door open. Sheriff Lowe was sitting behind his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked up when she burst in, and his face was a mask of pity and exhaustion. "Clara, you shouldn't be here." "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice raw. "That shot. I heard a shot." The sheriff sighed, a long, weary sound. "He's alive. Locked up. Henry got jumpy on the trail, fired a warning shot, scared a rabbit, that's all. Relief washed over her, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. He was alive. "I need to see him," she said. "Best not to, Clara. The town is a powder keg. Henry Rowan's been going from the saloon to the church, telling everyone Elias is a devil who's put a spell on you. They're not talking about a trial anymore. They're talking about a rope." "He's innocent," she pleaded, stepping closer. "Abner, you have to listen to me. He didn't kill anyone." The sheriff's gaze softened. "I believe you, Clara. I do. But there's the law, and then there's what people believe. And right now, they believe they have a monster in that cell. They want blood. Then I'll give them a fight," she said, her voice low and fierce. He looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his tired eyes. "You've always had fire. But this is a forest fire, Clara. You'll just get burned." Her eyes went past him, to the small barred window of the cell at the back of the office. A shadow moved, broad shoulders, dark hair. Her breath caught. "Please, Abner, just for a minute." The sheriff looked from her desperate face to the cell door. He was a man caught between his duty and his conscience. After a long moment, his conscience won. "2 minutes," he said, pulling a key from his drawer. He led her to the back. The cell was tiny, cold, and dark. Elias sat on the edge of a cot, his head in his hands. He looked up as the door opened, and she saw a fresh bruise blooming on his cheekbone. "You should not have come," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I had to." She rushed to the bars, her fingers gripping the cold iron. "You'll bring them trouble. They will turn on you." "I don't care," she choked out. "I care about you." For the first time since she'd met him, she saw his composure crack. His eyes shone with a fragile mix of disbelief, hope, and overwhelming sorrow. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you didn't leave me in the snow," she said, the words tumbling out. "Because you chopped wood for my fire when you could have run. Because you carved me a bird. Because you looked at me and saw a person, not a ghost." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "You are the one who is not a ghost, Clara. You are light. I was just trying not to be consumed by it." Before she could process his words, the office door flew open. "Sheriff!" a deputy yelled. "They're coming! Rowan's got a mob with him! They've got a rope!" Sheriff Lowe's face went pale. "You need to go, Clara! Now!" Elias was on his feet instantly. "Then I go," he said, his voice calm again, ready to meet his fate. The sheriff looked at Elias, then at Clara's terrified face, then at the angry shouts growing louder outside. He made a decision. He unlocked the cell door. "You didn't hear this from me," he muttered, shoving a small pistol into Elias's hand. "Go out the back. Take the old ridge road. It'll be treacherous, but they won't expect it. And Clara," he met her eyes, "don't come back. Not for a long time." Elias gave the sheriff a single silent nod of respect. Then he grabbed Clara's hand, and they ran. They slipped out the back into the biting wind, just as the mob crashed through the front door of the sheriff's office. They scrambled onto her horse, Elias swinging up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. They galloped out of town, the angry shouts of the mob fading behind them. The ridge road was a narrow, icy track clinging to the side of the mountain. One wrong step and they would plunge hundreds of feet. Behind them, they could hear the baying of hounds and the distant shouts of men. The mob was following. They reached a frozen creek, and Clara pulled the horse to a stop. "This way," she said, urging the horse into the shallow, icy water. "It will hide our tracks." They rode in the creek for half a mile before climbing back onto the bank, deep in the pines. For a moment, there was only silence, the drip of melting snow, and the sound of their own frantic breathing. Elias slid from the horse, turning to face her. His breath misted in the cold air. "You should go back, Clara. Tell them I forced you. No, you have a life to live." "I had one," she said, her voice breaking. Now I have this. I have you. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. The touch was so gentle, so full of reverence, it made her want to weep. You risk everything, he whispered, for a man the world wants to hang. The world is wrong, she whispered back. Just as he leaned in, a shout echoed from down the ridge. They'd been found. We have to get to the high pass, Elias said, his voice urgent. The snow is deeper there. It will slow them down. They ran. The horse struggled through deep snowdrifts, its lungs heaving. Then the shots rang out. The first bullet whizzed past Clara's head, so close she felt its heat. Elias twisted in the saddle, trying to shield her with his own body. Another shot cracked through the air. She felt him shudder behind her. A sharp, violent jolt, a choked gasp. Elias, keep riding, he gritted out, his voice strained with pain. The trail ended abruptly at a cliff's edge. They were trapped. She slid off the horse, pulling him down with her. His coat was already dark with blood. No, she sobbed, pressing her hands against the new wound. Not again. I can't lose you. He caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me, Clara. When they come, you tell them I took you hostage. You tell them I made you help me. I won't lie for you. Then you will die with me. His voice was harsh, desperate. I would rather that, she cried, than live a life without you. His fierce expression softened. For a long moment, there was only the wind and their ragged breaths mingled together. Then, the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. They were close. The mob was here. Elias pushed himself to his feet, swaying but resolute. Get behind the rocks, he commanded. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. He turned to her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective love. You saved my life, Clara. Let me save yours. Before she could argue, he stepped out from behind the rocks, into the open. He stood there, tall and proud against the snow, his blood a stark red banner against his torn shirt. A warrior facing his end. Henry Rowan appeared through the trees, his rifle raised, his face twisted with hate. There he is! Put the gun down, Henry! Clara screamed, rushing forward to stand beside Elias. Rowan sneered. Still defending him? You shame your husband's memory. Elias stood unmoving, his voice calm and clear, ringing out across the clearing. She has no shame, only a heart bigger than all your hate. The words hung in the cold, thin air. Henry fired. The sound echoed through the valley, but the bullet slammed into the rock wall just beside Elias, showering them with stone chips. Before Rowan could fire again, a new figure rode into the clearing. Sheriff Lowe, his face like thunder, his own gun drawn. Enough! He roared, his voice booming with an authority they had all forgotten he possessed. There has been enough blood this winter! The mob froze. The sheriff dismounted, walking slowly to stand between them and Elias. You will not commit a murder while I wear this badge. Henry, you go home. All of you, go home. Rowan spat in the snow. He's not a man, Sheriff. He's a savage. Lowe's gaze hardened into steel. He stood here, unarmed and wounded, ready to die to protect her. What does that make you, Henry? A man who shoots at his back from the trees? A wave of shame washed over the faces of the mob. Their fury, so hot just moments before, began to cool under the weight of the sheriff's words. One by one, they lowered their rifles. Clara moved to Elias's side, slipping her arm around his waist to hold him up. His knees were about to buckle, but he wouldn't fall. Not now. The sheriff holstered his gun. Take him home, Clara, he said, his voice soft now. Let the spring thaw bury all this madness. She nodded, tears of relief stinging her eyes. Together, she and Elias turned and began the slow, painful walk back down the mountain. Each step was an agony for him, each one marked by a drop of his blood on the snow. But they were walking together. They were walking home. When they finally reached the cabin, the fire was long dead. It was as cold inside as it was out. Clara helped him into the chair by the hearth. Her hands trembled as she struck a match and brought the flames back to life. He watched her, his face pale with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes were full of a love that warmed her more than any fire. "You'll live," she said, her voice breaking on a sob of certainty she didn't truly feel. He managed a weak smile. "You make it sound so easy." "Then just believe me," she whispered, pressing a clean cloth to his wound. Outside, the snow began to fall again, not a blizzard this time, but soft, gentle flakes, covering the bloody tracks, covering the hate, washing the world clean. Hours passed. The fire grew strong, filling the small cabin with golden light. Elias's breathing evened out, grew deeper. He was sleeping. He was healing. He reached for her hand in his sleep, his fingers lacing with hers. "You healed me twice," he murmured, his eyes still closed. "Once my body, and once my soul." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Then stay," she whispered. "Please, just stay." He opened his eyes and looked toward the window, where the first light of a new dawn was breaking, gentle and golden. "I will stay until the spring," he said. "And then I will stay until the summer. And if the world still wants a fight," he squeezed her hand, "then we will give them one." She smiled through her tears, resting her forehead against his. The snow outside shimmered, and the fire inside crackled, a defiant pulse of warmth in a world that had forgotten how to be merciful. The world will always try to judge what it doesn't understand. It will always build walls and call the people on the other side enemy. But sometimes, if you're brave enough, if you're kind enough, you find that beneath the snow and the silence, there's a fire worth fighting for. The kind that doesn't destroy. The kind that redeems. If you believe that mercy is a greater strength than hatred, don't forget to like and subscribe, because it's in stories like these that we remember what it truly means to be human.